I got it.
All right, everybody, we have some more goodies to give away. Quite exciting. Hey, Joshua, could you help me with, yeah, all right. So, why don't you draw the number? Keep it honest. All right, and, okay, I hope I say it right. It looks, Ed Florentino, number 849. It looks to me like a...
No, I look like an official person.
Ed or id, I'm not really sure.
All right, thank you.
TJ? TJ. Is it TJ? TJ, yes! Woohoo! You have got Gone Fishing by Jerry Tuck. Woohoo! All right, thank you. All right. Next, now, this lucky person gets a set of Doug Woodward's amazing stuff. Leslie Walbridge. Oh my goodness, exciting. Leslie, are you here?
Oh,
Leslie.
they got to be here to win.
Leslie. Oh no. Leslie. Oh, is she here? We don't know.
Must be present to win.
Yeah, that's kind of the rule. All right, maybe we'll set her up with something else. And this person is Nancy Battle? Nancy Battle? Number 835. Nancy. Yes. You've got this $50 set from Doug Woodward. Yeah. Okay, and
there will be a quiz later.
That's right. All right, this is a classic by Dr. Stanley Monteith, Brotherhood of Darkness. Interesting read, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
All right. And this is Jim Faze. Jim, are you here? Jim Faze. Jim. Okay, no Jim. We're going to keep on. Jim Faze? No. All right. Josh Likens. Oh, it's rigged. It's rigged. I'll tell you. Yeah, that counts. All right, and the last one by Adulam Phils, The Hidden Faith of the Founding Fathers. Chris Pinto, he's got some really interesting stuff. And this goes to Jeanette Werner. Hey, all right. Jeanette, are you here? I know I saw her. Jeanette. I did see her. Jeanette. All right, we'll count it as pretty darn close. All right, without further ado, I am proud to announce that Doug Woodward made it. We weren't sure. He was battling some illness, but he made it.
Very sick for most of the week.
We're glad you made it, Doug.
Thank you.
Yeah, now Doug is a good friend, and he's one of the 3 Dougs. So again, we were thinking of calling this the Doug Conference, but it just didn't sound right, you know? But I kind of like the ring. I mean,
yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Some future time. We need to have another Doug Shearer and a couple of Doug Riggs.
That's right.
We can get about 5 or 6 Dougs.
Oh, we can think a lot of Dougs.
Yeah, that's a lot of Dougs.
Now, what you don't realize is behind the scenes, we were having all these email debates. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. Doug's a great brother, and we've known each other for quite a few years now.
At least 5 years.
5 years.
Yeah.
And so thank you for presenting. So
thank you for inviting me. Thank you very much. All right. So we're going to talk about geopolitics. So we're shifting away from the history of theology. Then we're going to do some speculating, like we broadly defined dispensationalists do if you were in the last session, right? So we're going to talk about what actually is one of the most controversial sets of subjects in eschatology, and has been probably for the last, I'd say, 6 or 7 years, really maybe even 10 years, which is there is going to be a great war coming in the Middle East. We're not talking about a skirmish. We're not talking about the civil war in Syria. We're talking about a very major conflagration. Isn't that a great word? A major war. And the question is, which war is it? So that's really the main subject matter that we're going to discuss. Now, the first thing I need to do for my friend Clark Carlton, who's invited me to speak at his church tomorrow night, right? All right, so I will be speaking on two different subjects tomorrow night. One subject is on CERN, and a book that I wrote with three other gentlemen, including Anthony Patch, called Revising Reality, which is a biblical look at the cosmos. So it's a very different set of subject matter. And if you like the interplay of science and the Bible, then this is something that you're going to really find interesting. So I'll be talking about that in one discussion or one presentation. Second presentation, I'll be talking more about the latest book that I've written, along with my co-author, Gary Huffman, who's over here, is called The Revealing, which really deals primarily with the glorification, what it means for us to be glorified and so forth. I talked briefly about that today at lunchtime, after I ate my cheese pizza. So, but anyway, Clark's congregation is Victory Fellowship, 4200 South Acoma Street, A-C-O-M-A, in Inglewood. All right, and that's going to be at 6 p.m. So we'll be wrapped up around 9:30, I think. And so, really hope that you can come. 2 one-hour presentations with some Q&A, and they promise brownies. So, I think you gotta come for that. Are you actually doing a potluck dinner kind of like last year, or is it going to be a little different? Okay, right. And if hopefully your fingers taste better than mine. So in terms of finger food, I probably will abstain. But brownies I'm looking forward to. So during this presentation, I'm going to talk about primarily the book, The Next Great War in the Middle East. But from this book, I actually wrote a precursor to the book called Is Russia Destined to Nuke the U.S., which in the last 2 months has become very relevant again. That's why the sales are starting to go up again. And another book that came later, which is called Mistaken Identity, the case against the Islamic Antichrist. And I actually did a debate with Joel Rosenberg, who is the, I'll hopefully get my voice straightened out, who is the author of the Islamic Antichrist. So all those things are being discussed in this presentation. So let me get my water out here. I apologize, but I've had problems with my throat. That's part of my illness. So I've written a lot of books. I teach part-time at a university. And I was the founder of an accelerator. I was with Microsoft, Oracle, a number of technology companies for, oh gosh, almost 4 decades. And throughout that time, I've also studied Bible prophecy. And for the last 7 years, I've been writing books. Try to write about 2 books a year, and in my spare time. So that's a little bit about myself. So I mentioned these books. These are the ones that I will be speaking from today. Just as a grounding, it's important to have a little bit of sense of geography. If we're going to talk about the next great war in the Middle East, it's important to sort of remember where the various tribes are, and certainly also the lands that surround the tribes. Amalek, Moab, Edom, the Arameans, Ammon, and so forth. All these things come into play as you're reading through the scriptures that pertain to the return of the Messiah. All right, and so it's important to remember who the tribes are and where their territories were, and so forth. So I encourage you always to kind of go back and retake a look at that. It's quite interesting that in terms of discussion of the 2 sticks and the issue of who is Ephraim, that Ephraim and Judah were basically living more or less in the same kind of area in central Israel. And yet those are the dominant tribes that are talked about in Ezekiel 37, the 2 sticks and so forth. So Ammon, Moab, and Edom are not part, of course, of the 12 tribes, but they are really key in the prophecies of the next great war. So the candidates, the next great war in the Middle East, and I'm going to take some, just for fun, I'm going to take some fairly hard lines against Two that I don't believe are the next great wars, but they happen to be very popular in terms of the current literature that is discussed, the best-selling books and so forth. One is the Psalm 83 war. We'll talk about that. I'll take a stand against the Psalm 83 war. Second, which really comes from the Islamic Antichrist point of view, is the next great war is Armageddon. It's like cutting right to the chase. All right, that is the view of the Islamic Antichrist folks. Third view is the more traditional, really conventional view, which is Gog and Magog, even as Dr. Bill talked about back in the 4th, 5th century, they were already looking for Gog and Magog to appear. And of course, we'll talk more about that, but one of the key issues is Rush, whether or not the Russians, in fact, are Gog and Magog. But I will take the position, as you'll see, that Gog and Magog is the next great war, that Russia is Gog, and I'm not necessarily saying Putin is the Gog, because I think Gog, in fact, can be a power, a principality, a prince, if you will. But I will talk about why I think that that is the next great war. And in the process, I'm also going to position for you where America is in Bible prophecy. I take a different view than, again, the sort of most traditional view. Certainly the Psalm 83 view leaves America out of Bible prophecy, as does Hal Lindsey, as does Grant Jeffrey, as does Tim LaHaye. I take the view that America is vitally involved in Bible prophecy and unfortunately wears the black hat. That it has, in our day, it has incarnated Mystery Babylon to a great extent. Doug Krieger and I wrote a book together along with Dean McGriff a few years ago in 2013 called The Final Babylon, which really drills into the issue of America's role and why there's so much scripture that pertains to America and its place in Bible prophecy. And I'll eventually get to how this might fit into the rapture and the timing of the end and the sequence and so forth. So I think hopefully I'll keep you engaged as we go. All right, the Psalm 83 war. Bill Salas is a good brother, a good friend. He's a wonderful man, and he's done some great work. And he has really updated, to a great extent, the notions, or the understanding, I should say, of many in the eschatology community regarding the geopolitics of the Middle East. Now, Bill has taken the position that Psalm 83 is a prophetic psalm and that it is a future war, and he's written about that, of course, in these 3 books. Bill and I agree on almost everything, but we completely disagree on Psalm 83, which is kind of his thing, and we disagree on the role of American Bible prophecy. He is a very traditional, takes the view that America is not mentioned in Bible prophecy. So he and I go round and round on that. Then Joel Rosenberg, who is another brother who I greatly admire. He has a tremendous heart and passion for missions. I said Rosenberg, excuse me. Richardson, thank you. Yeah. Joel Rosenberg is another person I greatly admire too. Yes, but thank you for correcting me. It's easy to fall into that trap, as you can imagine. But I'll probably do it again, so hopefully I won't, but we'll see. Yeah, so Joel Richardson and Waleed Shubat they wrote together God's War on Terror back in 2006, 2007. They eventually separated not too many years after that. Waleed has been kind of off on his own thing, and he's converted to the Greek Orthodox Church. And so Joel has kind of been on his own for quite some time, but well supported by Joe Farah of WorldNet Daily, and he's had just some tremendous success with his books. He and I we've struck up a good friendship. We disagree on this, but we respect each other's position, respect each other's scholarship, and we had a very healthy, we decided to call it a fireside chat instead of a debate on this issue of whether or not the Antichrist, in fact, is going to be a Muslim, or my view, which is basically he's really an occultist, a Luciferian. Okay. Now, what they don't agree on, this is really in terms of Joel Richardson and Bill Salas, the Psalm 83 war theory represents a great danger to the body of Christ, in my view, because this theory holds that after the Psalm 83 Confederacy is defeated, Israel as a nation will literally occupy all the nations that surround her. It adheres to a certain and this is actually Richardson I'm quoting here, it adheres to a certain Israeli triumphalism that is simply not taught in Scripture. In other words, what happens in the Psalm 83 theory and then those that have followed that, and by the way, it is standard, it's even Hal Lindsey buys into the Psalm 83 theory. All right, so it's become very much the standard scenario for what's going to happen. But it suggests that the IDF will go to war and will gain territory all around Israel. And so this kind of fits into the whole Zionism issue that many people, of course, attack Israel as this Zionist conspiracy, and that all they want is really they want to destroy all their neighbors or put them into great chaos so that they can control or secure themselves in that area. So, but nevertheless, what happens in the Psalm 83 in that thinking and as it progresses is a sense in which the IDF will kill not thousands, but literally 1 million Palestinians. And so it becomes a completely, in my view, it's a geopolitical, it's a crazy geopolitical point of view to think that Israel could actually do that and could get away with it, and that the rest of the world, including the United States, would just let Israel accomplish that. There's reasons why that view is taken, which we'll get to. Now, this is something I won't have time to go into a great depth, but I do talk about it in the book. And this is probably, this is a talk for the more studied eschatology student, right? So just to warn you. There's a thing called the Geographic correlation theory. It was developed by a guy named Gleason Archer, who is a well-known evangelical scholar. And the Geographic correlation theory, ironically, am I in your way? Okay.
Just trying to get it back on so we can all see.
Oh, it's not quite centered properly, or?
Well, sometimes computers.
It's computer, yeah. I used to work for Bill Gates, so I know all about that.
I bet you did.
Yeah, I used to have problems with my technology, and I called it the curse of Bill Gates. People used to ask me, what does Bill Gates believe in? And I said, Bill Gates. This is very true.
Okay.
Are we good? And then we go to presentation mode?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Sorry to interrupt you.
It's okay. Let me go ahead and explain. The geographic correlation theory, which surprisingly Bill Salas and Joel Richardson agree on, and I disagree on, is that it doesn't matter the peoples that live in the nations like Edom or Ammon or the Arameans or the Assyrians. It doesn't matter what peoples are living in those areas today. It's the fact that the Bible names those nation states in the scriptures, in the prophecies. And so perhaps completely different peoples live there now, but it's because there are peoples that are in those locations. Those are the peoples that we really are dealing with in Psalm 83. I think that's absolutely wrong. I think that good scholarship can follow many of these peoples and trace their lineages and trace their histories in terms of where they went, where they settled, and so forth. And this is especially true about the people of the United States. But it's certainly an issue regarding Assyria, the Assyrian, the Antichrist, and so forth. I can't go into it any further other than to say that in my view, this is one of the key strategic mistakes being made in eschatology today and has been for a number of years. Okay? So hopefully that will drive you to learn more about what I'm talking about. Gog Magog, the next war. This, of course, is the view that I take. We lost another great brother, John Price. This past year, I was privileged to have John write the foreword to the next great war in the Middle East, and he was very kind and very gracious in some of the things that he said. When I get to some of the core things that I brought up that are unique in the book, I'll talk about where John provided some endorsement for that. John's book, The End of America, is actually the most popular book on Amazon dealing with the issues associated or the challenges associated with Islam. It was a very, very successful book, but John did pass away about 6 months ago. A book by Douglas Berner. Douglas is a former, another Doug, he's a former policeman, lives in North Carolina or South Carolina. He's only written a couple of books, but this book is one of the best books written on the whole issue of Gog Magog in terms of tracing. It was written in 2007, but it does a fabulous job academically. Dr. Bill, it would be worthy of a book for you to be familiar with in terms of tracking all of the different nations and the different views of the different scholars that are more contemporary, let's say in the last 30 years, in terms of who they identify and to what category they fit in, or who are they in Scripture and who are they today and so forth. So it's a book I highly recommend. By the way, all my slides, just so you know, I will make them available on my website so that you can download them. And in fact, the slide deck that I give you will probably have about 40 more slides that I don't have time to show you today. All my slide decks are available at my website, which is cleverly called doomsdaydoug.com. And just look for PowerPoint slides and you'll see them. So, because I'm a former Microsoftie, you can tell that I take pride in my PowerPoint slides. All right, Psalm 83. Let me give you more detail about the Psalm 83 war. It's an inner circle of nations not mentioned in Ezekiel 38 to 39. That's important. This inner circle conspires to eliminate the name of Israel forever. That is in Psalm 83. The point I make is that to interpret Psalm 83 the way that Bill and others that follow Bill want to interpret it, it's important that they understand and take a particular passage in Ezekiel 38 to a very specific scenario, which is Ezekiel 38:11, that are at rest, that dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls and having neither bars nor gates. Bill perceives that this is talking about Israel, and as you'll see later, and I have to rush, I can't do it as dramatically as I'd like to. I believe it's talking about America, and I'll explain why when I get there. Psalm 83, Israel represents a nation with riches, makes Gog envious. In Psalm 83, this view fulfills selected prophecies of Israel destroying its enemies. So again, that's kind of the overview of the Psalm 83 scenario. The case is a pretty strong one. Most of this you all will be familiar with, but it's identifying the different tribes that are listed in Psalm 83 and where they're located. And so one of course, the interesting points that Bill talks about is the tents of Edom. Believes that refers to the Palestinians. I think that would be quite a few anthropologists that would probably hemorrhage at that comparison. So there's some problems with just the mapping of the different peoples to the different locations. But I'll go into critique it here a little bit further. But anyway, it's important to understand these different tribes pertain to different groups or tribes around Israel. The position that I take, and then Chris White, I'm using some of Chris's research here. Psalm 83 is not a future war. It's not a prophecy. It doesn't say, thus saith the Lord. It's not saying in the latter days, such as the Ezekiel prophecies. There are many similar psalms that are imprecatory psalms, which are psalms of cursing, essentially. Psalm 6, 7, 25, so on. These are imprecatory psalms. In the psalm, enemies are making plans for war, but no war comes, it turns out, such as they take crafty counsel, they conspire, they confederate, but ultimately God answers Asaph's prayer. Asaph was King David's choir director, basically, and Asaph did make prophecies, so Bill is correct about that, but God answers the prayer, and David's empire expands, and Psalm 83 basically was fulfilled. Let's see, to go on, belligerents were in David's time, not in ours. The Psalm 83 role denies the Assyrian role in the conspiracy, but it was engaged. This actually was documented. Chris did a good job of pointing these things out, taking some of Bill's contentions and showing that, no, that Bill was historically not accurate in that. So, bottom line, to take away, there's strong historical evidence that Psalm 83 was fulfilled. It's not a future war. It should not be driving our understanding of the scenario of what happens next in terms of geopolitics in the Middle East. Let's see, it looks like, okay, right, why Psalm 83 is not next. The conflict's been underway for almost a century, from 1917 to now. It assumes that Israel is the land of unwalled villages. I think we can demonstrate that it's not really true. It assumes that Israel must be secure, that it's no longer threatened by its neighbors, that Israel must be in possession of great booty. It must be a great empire. Now, yes, Israel has discovered lots of oil in the Golan Heights, which of course is contested ground. But I'll show you a little bit later when we're talking money, I'll show you what real money is. And it's not oil in the Golan Heights. Therefore, Israel must defeat its neighbors in a great way. That's one of the reasons, or these are reasons why Psalm 83 is not the next war. The geopolitics associated with this challenges both Turkey and Israel as empires. For Israel to defeat the inner circle, the outer circle has to ignore it. In other words, is it realistic that Israel would go to war with the inner circle while Turkey, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Egypt did nothing? Not likely. It's certainly not likely that that would happen with Russia and the United States and Europe doing nothing about it. So it's very difficult to see how that could happen. All right, the view that I hold is that Armageddon is the next great war. And so what does that mean? It means it's soon. It means that we are closer than one might think. Gog, Antichrist, and the Mahdi are the same guy. Oh, excuse me, I messed up. I'm going too fast. This is the view of the Islamic Antichrist, that Armageddon is the next war, not Gog and Magog. So please forgive me. I'm trying to go too fast because I know I don't have that much time. In the Islamic Antichrist view, Gog and the Antichrist and the Mahdi are all the same character, right? There's no distinction. We don't have time to go into the 2-king versus 3-king theory of Daniel 11, that one of these kings is Gog and so forth, the king of the north, who is the king of the south. There's a strong argument that all of Daniel 11 is in fact history, that King Herod was involved, Octavian, and so on. I go into that in the books, if you're interested in that. So the attributes of the Antichrist are listed in Daniel 11, but the history was fulfilled already in Daniel 11. I'm not a preterist, but in terms of that, it's impressive because Daniel, whenever he wrote it, 450 BC, 150 BC, they were all prophecies, and they fulfilled in great detail, in my view, by Octavian and by Herod, leading up to the time of Christ. The Assyrian is the Antichrist in terms of the Joel Richardson, Walid Shabbat point of view. They believe he's Islamic. They believe he's a Turk. So Erdogan, Recep Tayyip Erdogan is, public enemy number one is the possibility of the Antichrist. Gog and Magog is the same as Armageddon in terms of the battle at the end. And the prophecies of the last day, they believe are regional. They believe the Bible is a regional book. Dr. Michael Heiser, who I love, makes this point very strongly. The Bible is a Mediterranean book. And so it doesn't talk about the whole world. It just talks about the region. I disagree. But that's the point. And certainly Joel Richardson leverages that thinking to say the Antichrist is from the Middle East. He's a Turk. Okay? So America, Russia, they're not involved. All right, the Ottoman Empire revives. The focus on this last empire is not the revived Roman Empire, it's the Ottoman Empire, which of course caved in the 1920s. And perhaps the weakest link in the argument for the Islamic Antichrist is Mecca, is Mystery Babylon. There is, in my view, very, very low evidence that Mecca is Mystery Babylon. I have not had time to read Joel's latest book and critique it, but we did exchange books, and so hopefully I'll get around to that eventually here before too long. So, looking at the Islamic Antichrist, again, a number of things that I've written about it. The key question, these are some of the arguments for it. Will Turkey rule the roost? Is Turkey really going to be the bad guy, the heavy in the last day? There's a number of reasons why people think so. The 7 churches are mentioned there in Turkey. Noah's Ark came to rest in Turkey. Pergamon was in Turkey. You know, I'm not sure that all these really make a lot of sense, but I've heard these arguments advanced as to why Turkey is is Gog and Magog and is in fact the Antichrist. And of course, Ankara is more true north of Jerusalem than Moscow, and Turkey is the protector of Islam. So these are a lot of the reasons why Turkey is fingered as the next bad guy. All right. So one of the problems, of course, gets into this Sunni Shia issue, and the fact that Turkey is Sunni, but underneath it is the Shia. Used to be called the Fertile Crescent. Fertile Crescent's now the Shia Crescent. So it stretches from Hezbollah in Lebanon all the way to Iran, into Tehran in Iran. So you have dominant Shia presence, right? And who's the number one ally for the Shia? Well, Iran is the number one Shia, but Russia is the number one ally, correct? And of course that's the issue of Iran versus Saudi Arabia. We're going to get to why that's important as well. Don't have time to talk about the U.S. and the CIA and how the CIA has been messing around with, fiddling in elections, worries that Russia was fiddling in our election. There's a academic that I saw a week ago on TV. He said, "Do you realize since 1957 the CIA has been involved in 81 elections in the world trying to fix the election?" So it's not exactly like that we're not guilty of trying to influence geopolitics. So the question, Turkey, could it be Antichrist power base? The U.S. and Russia would have to be neutralized. If Turkey is the player, for Turkey to take action against Israel, the U.S. and Russia would have to be out of the picture. The occult elite must be neutralized. Then they're not Muslim. All right, the Vatican has to be destroyed or integrated with Islam for Islam to be this dominating power in the last days. Turkey and Iran have to come together. Now that's closer now than it was 3 or 4 years ago, but still that's got to be very much a part of the Ezekiel scenario, and it will be. It's not going to be necessarily the dominating alliance. Turkey must have vast economic power. Now, if you look at a George Friedman or someone that does geopolitical analysis, basically says in 50 years, Turkey may be the most dominating power in that entire Eurasian area. So, but we don't have 50 years, in my view. Bible prophecy must be regional only. I think it's worldwide. So, and here's my point. So look at some of these verses. Look how the Apostle John is stressing the global nature of the prophecies. And they sang a new song saying, "Worthy are you to take the book and to break its seals. For you were slain and purchased for God with your blood men from every tribe and tongue and people and nation." You see this phrase used again in Revelation 7:9 and then in Revelation 10:11. "And I was told, you must again prophesy about many peoples and nations and languages and kings. And also it was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them, and authority was given it over every tribe and people and language and nation." In John's time, could John have been any more explicit that he was dealing not with a regional power? He had no other way to say it is universal, it is global. And so to contend that Bible prophecy is limited to a regional nature, which is what the Islamic Antichrist argues, is very, very difficult. It doesn't square well with the book of Revelation. John Haller kind of came up with this, and I sort of came up with it at the same time, so we can argue over who came up with this, but sort of the new gap theory. What this is about is the fact that both in the Joel Richardson scenario and in the Bill Salas scenario, both of them believe that geopolitical events are happening at such a pace that it will be many, many, many years before their scenarios can come to pass. In other words, there's going to be a gap because, not in Joel Richardson's case, because he's basically a pre-wrath or post-trib, point of view. But in Bill's view, Bill is pre-trib. So I remember seeing Bill and Chuck Missler talk about the fact that there might be a 20, 30, 40-year gap between the rapture and the war, right? There may be a long gap before Psalm 83 happens. Or Psalm 83 might happen, but it may be a really long gap before the next war happens. It's because of the scenario that they've developed that they would argue that it has to take a long time. Hence why we call it the new gap theory. There's a big gap. Now, I happen to believe there may be a gap as well, but it's 3 years or less. And I'll get to that in a moment. All right, so now my argument, Gog and Magog, the next war. When does it occur? There are 5 different views in terms of the scholars over the last 30, 40 years. I think I show that next. Yes, I do. All right. I'm going to list about 30 scholars, and they're going to line up into 5 camps in terms of when they believe Gog and Magog happens. They're going to either say it happens at the end of the Great Tribulation. It is, in effect, the same as Armageddon. Who else argues that the coming of Messiah and Armageddon and Gog and Magog are all one and the same, beside the Islamic Antichrist? It's a very big group that we've been talking about at this conference that argues that. They don't call it Armageddon, they just call it Gog and Magog and a Messianic war. Israel. It's the war of Messiah. So, but that is the Jewish traditional view, right? Second group, during the Great Tribulation, after the midpoint, after the abomination of desolation sets things in motion for Gog and Magog to occur, after that happens, that's when Gog and Magog takes place. Third group, immediately prior to the midpoint, just before the abomination of desolation, Gog and Magog happens. Fourth group, at the very beginning of Daniel's 70th week, 7 years before the return of Christ, Gog and Magog mark when Daniel's final 70th week begins. The fifth group, sometime prior to the beginning of Daniel's 70th week, possibly 3 to 3.5 years before the final 7 years begins. Now, by the way, as a quick aside, I'm not hung up on saying that the Great Tribulation or the Tribulation is the same as Daniel's 70th week. They don't have to be the same. Now, there's a strong argument that the Great Tribulation is a 3.5 year period, and that is part of Daniel's 70th week, that it's the last part. But the whole 7 years, to call it the tribulation, that's not necessarily biblical. That is the scenario that was worked out by Lindsay, LaHaye, and others. But as you look at a lot of the material, in fact, that Dr. Bill talks about, if you go back and you look at some of these scholars from 200, 300, 400 years ago, you know, they're all typically more like mid-trib. They talk about the Great Tribulation being about a 3.5 year period. So this kind of sort of identifying Daniel's 70th week and a pre-trib period of 7 years. That's not really a historical position that's been argued that long. That's really been from Hal Lindsey forward to our time. So I'm not hung up on that. That doesn't mean that it can't be, right? But I'm just saying that doesn't have to be that way. So in the book, I show these different 5 positions and the different scholars, if you will, that take a position. Some of them are not scholars, some of them are authors. I consider myself an author. I don't consider myself a scholar. Dr. Bill is a scholar. But I read a lot. I'm a layperson, and I write and try to communicate it. And so, but I would highlight here that I fit into the category of the Battle of Gog and Magog happens sometime before the 70th week of Daniel. Excuse me, and I'm in good company. Arnold Fruchtenbaum, Emil Gavriluk, John Hagee, Grant Jeffrey, Tim LaHaye, Chuck Missler, Randall Price, Chuck Smith, and me. I'm not really at the same level as most of those guys. But nevertheless, I would argue that, as they do, that Gog and Magog happens some period of time. Perhaps Fruchtenbaum's pretty specific, 3.5 years. There's this 7-year burning of the weapons, and this would sort of work out that has to occur halfway, just about the time of the abomination of desolation. And so we're looking at about a 10 to 10.5 year period from the time of the Gog and Magog war until the consummation, until Christ returns. That is the argument of most of the most popular writers that you're familiar with, not necessarily post-trib writers, but writers that have had probably the greatest impact in the prophecy movement. I thought this was interesting, going back and looking at a quote from John Wolford. How am I doing on time? I got about 10 minutes left, 15 minutes? So, cool. We got 10, all right. It's never enough time. Never enough time. That's why you have to get the books. This was interesting. Woodward said this in 1974. The attack by Russia will be a desperate attempt to recoup her position as a world power with influence over the Middle East. He said that in 1974. That could have been said yesterday. I mean, think about that. 41 years ago. So the great game, as it's called, I don't have to talk about it, but that was essentially, who just passed away? Brzezinski, right? Yeah, Zygmunt Brzezinski, talking about Halford's concept of the great game, which really drives geopolitics for the last 100 years, essentially, which I don't have time to talk about, sorry, but I talk about it in the book. Critical passage to analyze. This gets into the issue of who are we talking about in Ezekiel 38. Clearly, in Ezekiel 1 through 9, we've been talking about Israel, we've been talking about Russia, I believe, which I go into great depth to discuss. By the way, at the end of this book, I'll show you a chart that I have. A chart that I have essentially lists all of the references in history from this line to this line are references before Ezekiel to Russia, to the land of the Rus, the river, the Russian river, the Rus River, all of these different records that the Russians were considered the Rus. All right, so by the time you get to Ezekiel, the concept of Rus or Russia was very well understood and very well known. And then there's more, many more listings identifying Russia as who Ezekiel's talking about. So it's not, the view nowadays is that there's confusion because Rosh in the Hebrew means chief, like the chief priest. Rosh can mean that, but Rosh can also mean Rosh as in Russia. And so there's been a lot of confusion around that. So I take some time to try to point out why I think there is a very good argument that Russia is God. All right, back to this passage. Thus saith the Lord God, it shall also come to pass that at the same time shall things come into thy mind, and thou shalt think an evil thought. And thou shalt say, I will go up to the land of unwalled villages. I will go up to them that are at rest, that dwell safely. All of them dwelling without walls and having neither bars nor gates, to take a spoil, to take a prey, to turn thine hand upon the desolate places that are now inhabited, and upon the people that are gathered out of the nations, which have gotten cattle and goods that dwell in the midst of the land. Sounds like it could be talking about Israel. But if you run through it, it also could be talking about North America. Oh, gee, I don't know if I have time to go through all this great scholarship here. But let's see. I'm trying to decide whether to deal with this. There's the word betach in Hebrew, which means safely. And the word in Ezekiel, let me go back here and see if I can find where this is the right word. Those that dwell safely. In verse 11, those that dwell safely, uses the word betach. Every time in the Old Testament that the word betach is used, it's used in two contexts. One, Messianic security for Israel. And there it means the word, basically literally, true safety, bliss, carefree, you're safe, you're secure. 6 times it's used to dwell carelessly, arrogantly, all right? And in these examples that I highlight here in Judges, Ezekiel, Zephaniah, and Isaiah, including the daughter of Babylon, the word betach is used dwelling carelessly, meaning that arrogantly. And the point being, I'll go back here, the point being in verse 11, where betach is used, if it is referring to Israel, it should be saying, if it were referring to Israel, it would not be saying dwell carelessly. It would be saying dwell safely. And yet the context is that it is generally translated carelessly, or should be translated carelessly. You have to go into it in great detail, but why it's important is that it sets up the Psalm 83 argument. And it is the key point to drill down on. If we had time, we could go through it in more detail. But it's, in effect, God always, if Israel was being criticized in this passage, it would be the only place in Scripture where Israel is criticized using the word betach. Otherwise, the word is always used to promise Israel peace and security in the millennium. When it's used carelessly, it's always dealing with the enemies of God. This is dealing with Babylon. It's not dealing with Israel. And I'm going to move ahead. I'll have to move ahead kind of quickly here. I apologize. I need another hour probably. Let me see if I can hit a couple of points. I can't believe my time went by that fast. Well, let me just make this point. Is Israel a land of unwalled villages? Israel is not a land of unwalled villages. It has a 417-mile long wall. And so it's important to understand that. Now let me hop back and hit this other point about, Krieger and I went through this in great detail and talked about the merchants of Tarshish, about the Phoenicians, and how ultimately if you study that, you're going to find yourself dealing with Tarshish in Spain and in England, and ultimately you're going to be dealing with the United States. That's where the flow of the people are. And this global merchant that, ironically, Ezekiel 28, talking about Satan, in effect, Lucifer, the king of Tyre, you're dealing with, in effect, the enemy of God. And it's dealing with the great economic powerhouse of the day. And who is that great maritime economic powerhouse of today? It's not Britain anymore. It's the United States. So we go into depth to talk about those things. The young lions are America, and these are all the people that agree that the discussion of the young lions in verse 13, I have to hop around because, all right, let me read this verse. Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish with all the young lions thereof shall say unto thee, art thou come to take a spoil? Art thou gathered thy company to take a prey, to carry away silver and gold, to take away cattle and goods, to take a great spoil? Again, the usual position that was taken by Hal Lindsey and Grant Jeffrey and others is that this is dealing with England, with Saudi Arabia, with the United States, and that we're all those nations are being passive. That the previous verses, the attack of Gog and Magog is upon Israel, that these nations are just saying, oh gee, Russia is attacking Israel. Whatever do? We won't do anything because we're not going to come to the aid of Israel. That's the traditional conventional view. The view that I espouse is that the reason that they're saying what they're saying is not that they're passive or not that they're surprised that Israel is being attacked. They're surprised that they are being attacked. And in fact, the scenario is that, in my view, is that prior to Israel and the power or the war, Gog and Magog coming against Israel, there has to be a preemptive strike against the Anglo-American axis of power, economically and militarily. And that is what is being discussed here. It's very easy to see that Iran would be very keen to take out Saudi Arabia. As we know, geopolitically, they are very much enemies. Turkey is very much against Saudi Arabia. Those two have fought for hundreds of years as to who it was that should be leading the Arab world. All right, so more arguments about the United States. Let me just talk about this. Capturing booty, the big time. This is talking about the relationship between England and Saudi Arabia and the amount of money that's involved. This is talking about petrodollars, the fact that the petrodollar, the relationship between the United States, beginning with Nixon, with the House of Saud, created the commodity. Instead of gold, oil is the commodity that the economy of the world is based upon, right? And so this is where the real money is. This is the money that we're talking about. If the petrodollar would collapse, what would happen? It would send the world into chaos. However, allow me to ask this question just to see how many of you are kind of thinking about these kinds of issues. If oil were no longer the commodity that the economy of the world was being based on, what would likely be the commodity It's not gold and silver, by the way. What would likely be the commodity that would be the basis of the economy going forward from right now as we look for the next 100 years? Water would be one of the best ones, and one other. What, pardon me? Lead? What, for bullets and things like that? Yeah, or uranium, maybe. Food. In fact, there's a good argument that the reason the GMO food thing was going on was it was a preparation to make food the commodity to back all of the economy of the world. All right, so moving quickly, there's the discussion of Rosh and so forth. And let's see here. Yeah, why is Russia so nervous? Actually, I trimmed this way down. Believe it or not. Let me just make a couple of points. Why is a nuclear war likely? All right, well, first off, you need to understand that Russia has these things called mobile missile launchers, which we don't have. All of their nuclear devices are up to date. Ours aren't. Ours were based upon designs that were done 50 years ago. They were to be phased out 10 years after that. They were never phased out. That's still what we have, land-based missiles. So Trident subs, our boomers, if you will, are our primary attack weapon. Bombers, yes, to some extent, but not as effective as submarines. But the Russians have more missiles. There is a missile gap that we used to talk about back in the 60s and 70s. But here's the real important thing. If you're going to go to a nuclear war, the key thing you need to have is you need to have the ability to defend your people and your country. The United States has approximately 100 anti-ballistic missiles. Approximately 100. Most of those are deployed in North Dakota, Alaska, and California. All right? The Russians have 11,000. The Russians have been building underground cities for decades. They've been preparing, they did a drill, I think it involved 250,000 civilians that was done. I may have the numbers, they may be low. This was done about a year ago as a civil defense measure to prep the population for a nuclear attack from the United States. The Russians have been building a perimeter all around their country to protect themselves against a first strike from the United States. All right, so the Russians cannot compete with us in a conventional war. But the next war with Russia will not be a conventional war. It will be a nuclear war. So Putin has been placing all of his chips on the issue of nuclear weapons, right? So why is a nuclear war likely? Economic pressures on Russia continue to build. Putin uses war to keep a hold of his power, just like, what's his name, Kim Jong-un does in North Korea. Power is a key to his, or the nuclear weapons are a key to his ability to maintain his power. The geographical threats in Eastern Europe that he feels from the West, this puts pressure on him. The New World Order undermines Russia. Russia, until Trump became the president, Russia was the only large nation state that was focused on a nationalist agenda, if you will. And the rest of the world was under the leadership of the United States to go towards the New World Order, right? So, you know, think back. League of Nations, United Nations. The U.S. has been leading the charge for the one world government. Russia, that's why Putin to some extent has been popular, even in the United States, is because he's been pushing back against the New World Order. It also helped that he kind of got interested in, you know, the Russian Orthodox Church again. That was kind of helpful too, especially because our prior president kind of looked like he might be Islamic. Some people think he might have been. I don't know, do you think he might have been? So, is Trump being forced into a conflict with Russia? Kind of looks like he might be. Why did he fire 59 missiles at Syria after he gave the Russians a 1 hour notice and he gave the Syrians a 1 hour notice, and he didn't hit any of the runways so that an hour later they could start taking off? I mean, it was just, it was a PR move, totally. So, let me just hit these points. A number of authors have written extensively. Richard Coombs, the late Richard Coombs, John Price I mentioned, Doug Krieger and myself wrote a book on this, looking at all of the verses, specifically in Jeremiah 50 and 51, but a few other places that discuss the daughter of Babylon. All of the attributes that are laid out for the daughter of Babylon fit the United States to a T. They don't fit anyone else. They don't fit ancient Babylon. They don't fit a rebuilt Babylon. You know, it's really only us that they fit. The hindermost, or the most powerful, the last most powerful nation, the last in a series, the hammer of the whole earth, the richest nation in the world, a mingled people, a nation living on many waters. You know, we have 3 oceans. We have we have more fresh water in the world than just about anyone else. The nations flow unto him. The United Nations comes here. The people of God to flee Babylon. You know, after Israel has approximately 6 million Jews, the United States has approximately 6 million Jews. No place else has hardly any Jews. So if they're to flee Babylon to go to Israel, they're coming from the United States. So this is what, 6? There are 60 such things that address the issue of the United States. So, Jeremiah, for lo, I will raise and cause to come up against Babylon an assembly of great nations from the north country, and they shall set themselves in array against her. From thence she shall be taken. Their arrows shall be as of a mighty expert man. None shall return in vain. And Chaldea shall be a spoil. All that spoil her shall be satisfied, saith the Lord. So when this great power from the north comes against the daughter of Babylon, it will be successful. The daughter of Babylon will be as Sodom and Gomorrah, the scripture says. It's not a good picture for us. That's why it's not good that I did this presentation as your last presentation of the day. Hopefully someone else will have something happy to say after I'm done. So, I'll have, I just have to stop there. Many more things I could go into. I'll probably turn this into, in fact, I'm going to be turning this into like a 2 or 3 hour DVD. And I'll have that available hopefully within 2 or 3 months. But the presentation will be out on my website. And I hope that you'll buy the books and study this up, because in many ways, this is the most controversial area. And if you really want to know what's going to happen next, this is where it's at. Cool. Thank you,
Doug. That was awesome.
No, great. Thanks.
Really interesting research. Appreciate that.
You're welcome.
So the first question is, isn't Babylon a metaphorical city? Come out of her, my people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Babylon is partially a metaphorical city. Certainly, you could argue Jerusalem is as well in that sense. Babylon is mentioned second only to Jerusalem. But there's no question that Babylon is a historical city. And then if you get into the issue of Mystery Babylon likely means a system that has existed since, I like Chad's presentation, going back to all the different arches. You know, Mystery Babylon has existed really since the powers and principalities have been dominating the world. So Babylon does represent a symbol, but it's also, if you look at these attributes that I just went through in Jeremiah, it's very easy to map those attributes against one particular country.
Awesome. Why can't the Gog-Magog war take place at the end of the millennium, per Revelation 20?
Right. Well, there would appear to be a number of things that have to happen if one accepts that the Gog-Magog war is this group of nations that come against Israel, and all of the events that are discussed in Ezekiel 38 and 39 are events that happen after, which is clearly what the scripture teaches. Then the only option is that all those events happen in the millennium, or that they happen at the end of the millennium, which of course is a view that a few hold. Michael Heiser tends to hold to that view, as do a few others, but it's not the main view. So yes, one could argue that it happens, could happen at the end of the tribulation. That was the question, right? Yeah, or at the end of the millennium. It's not certainly not the concerted view of most of the scholars, of course.
Awesome. Do you think that the temple will be rebuilt, or could it be the temple is the human body?
Well, that's certainly one of the options. Other options that have been talked about is that it could only be an altar. An altar was built, I think, in the time of not Judas Maccabeus, but in the uprising in 135 AD. They built an ark.
Bar Kokhba.
Yeah, Bar Kokhba. They were going to start sacrificing there without a tabernacle, without a temple and all that, but that was stopped before that occurred. But it's possible that one of the tabernacles, the tabernacle of David, may have been in storage, maybe down there wherever the Ark of the Covenant may be. Maybe. So a lot of speculation about that. So yeah, it certainly appears that the prophecies are so specific about the Antichrist, desolation of the temple, that it appears that some structure will be there that is regarded as the center of Jewish worship, I believe.
Awesome. Is it true that the word tumult, there we go.
Tumult.
That the word tumult, used in Psalm 83, doesn't mean war, but restless, uprising, etc. in the Bible?
Good. Yeah, I don't have you would probably be better able to answer that than me because it's probably a Hebrew question. So I'm not a Hebrew expert by any stretch. So, yeah.
Okay. Manly P. Hall wrote about the secret destiny of America in 1921, I believe.
Yeah.
It seems to fit in with what you were saying. The statute or the state of District of Columbia, USA, is leading the NWO, the New World Order. Yeah.
I wrote 2 books called Power Quest, America's Obsession with the Paranormal, and the second one, Power Quest, the Coming of Antichrist in America, I think it was the subtitle. I go into great detail and document it thoroughly. I don't go into that same level of detail in The Final Babylon, but in those 2 books I go into great detail. Americans have very little understanding as to how evil how much evil the United States has done in many compartments of the government, and certainly the occult core of America. Tom Horns talked about that extensively in his book, Apollyon Rising, and so on. So yeah, absolutely, it fits in. I believe that the Antichrist is a Luciferian, that he is consciously aware that he's incarnating Satan, and so he would be ultimately an occultist. Yes.
Okay. What country do the Rothschild or the Rothschilds support?
What country?
Yes.
Well, they support America to some extent, and they support Israel. The Red Shields, the Rothschilds, they're still pretty evident that they control and dominate the economics of the world. And of course, one of the big issues, which when I get my next book I'm going to be working on, is a book on Israel, and it's going to be probably entitled Betraying Zion. And it's going to be dealing with things like the issue of Zionism and neocons, and the kind of confederation between the neocon view and the Zionist view, and why it's created so much animosity. How Israel has effectively taken, I won't say taken control, but it has so heavily influenced our Congress that you have to be a strong supporter of Israel to be successful as a politician in the United States. And there is a tremendous amount of resentment. There's a lot of concern about dual citizenship. Congressmen or other American leaders that are citizens of Israel and America, and there's a worry that the real loyalty lies with Israel. And so, I mean, I'm a strong supporter of Israel, but I think it's important as Christians that we be aware of some of the challenges, the power of the Israeli lobby, AIPAC, and all that. There's some aspects as Americans that we should be concerned about, because not everything that Israel wants is really what America wants. And we need to be more aware of that. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be supporting Israel, but we have to be much more discerning than we have been.
Great, fantastic.
Great.
Thank you very much, Doug.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Okay, well, we are 10 minutes behind schedule, but we invite you to check out some of the restaurants very close. You can just go to Kipling, go north a little bit, and there's a bunch of restaurants there. We will reconvene at 6. Since we're a little bit behind, we might just wait 5 minutes, but do come back as much on time as you can, because we are going to have more raffles and more speakers. So